5 shocking facts about medieval childbirth. Imagine being a medieval woman in labor, surrounded not by doctors, but by candles, charms, and terrified whispers. No painkillers, no clean instruments, and death standing right beside the bed. Tonight, we're diving into 5 shocking truths about medieval childbirth. And trust me, you won't forget them. Fact 1. Death was always waiting. Childbirth in the Middle Ages wasn't a beautiful moment of joy. It was a gamble with death. Imagine this. You're a young woman, maybe 16, maybe 20, and it's your first pregnancy. Your family gathers anxiously. Midwives rush to prepare herbs and cloths, and you know deep in your bones that this moment might be your last. In some regions, women were told to make a will before they went into labor. That's how dangerous it was. Historians estimate that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 3 women died during childbirth in their lifetime. Think about that. Your wedding vows may not be till death do us part, but till childbirth takes me away. Why? Because there were no clean instruments, no knowledge of germs, no surgical options. Hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labor, each of these could end a life in hours. Even something as small as an unwashed hand could turn into a deadly fever. And remember, pain relief didn't exist. Mothers endured hours, sometimes days, of agony, with nothing more than prayers and warm ale. And when the pain dragged on, people began to wonder, was it just nature being cruel? Or was something darker in the room with her? In the candlelit chamber, when screams echoed through the night, some swore they weren't hearing a woman alone. They believed demons had slipped into the room, wrestling for her soul. That's where our second shocking truth begins. Fact 2. Demons in the delivery room. When medieval labor stretched on 2 long hours, turning into a full day, then another people didn't think of medical complications. They thought of evil spirits. In a dark, smoky chamber, where the only light came from flickering candles, whispers would spread. Something is holding the baby back, and they didn't mean nature. They meant demons. Church records and medical manuscripts describe how families would call for priests to bless the birthing room with holy water. Relics, scraps of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, even written charms were slipped under the mattress or tied to the mother's body. Some women clutched wax figures of the Virgin Mary. Others had protective prayers sewn into their clothes, thread by thread, in the hope that the devil's grip would weaken. One famous charm read aloud over a woman in labor promised, "As Christ came forth from the Virgin's womb, so too shall this child come forth with ease." It wasn't just ritual, it was survival. And yet, what strikes us today is how normal this was. Faith and fear of the supernatural weren't side notes, they were part of medicine. If a mother screamed through the night, it wasn't just her voice people thought they heard. They believed she was wrestling with the devil himself. But when prayers failed, when holy water didn't bring relief, people turned to something even stranger. Remedies that today sound less like medicine and more like desperation. From drinking bitter brews of herbs and ale, to biting down on wood, to placing things on the body you'd never expect, the medieval toolkit for childbirth was as bizarre as it was dangerous. Which brings us to our third shocking fact. Fact 3. Remedies stranger than fiction. When prayers and holy relics failed to ease the agony, midwives reached for remedies, some natural, some bizarre, and some downright disturbing. A mother might be given warm ale mixed with crushed herbs, meant to relax her body. She could be handed bitter roots to chew, or told to bite down on a stick of wood so she wouldn't scream herself hoarse. Some records suggest rubbing oils of sage, fennel, or rue onto her stomach, in the belief that these plants carried hidden powers to loosen the womb. But here's where things turn darker. Medieval manuscripts mention remedies that make us shudder today. Animal dung poultices pressed against the mother's body to draw out pain. The belief was that filth could somehow pull the sickness away. Even more unsettling, some superstitions claim that placing the hand of a dead man on a woman's belly could speed the delivery, as if death itself could persuade life to be born. These practices sound horrifying now, but in a world without doctors or medicine, people clung to whatever hope they could. Remedies weren't just about healing, they were about survival. They were born of desperation, when every scream, every hour that passed, felt like a battle against time. And time was the enemy, because even if the mother survived the torment, the baby's soul was already in danger. Newborns in the Middle Ages faced terrifying odds. Many didn't survive their first hours. That's why midwives had to be ready not with medicine, but with holy water. And this leads us to our fourth shocking truth: the race to baptize a child before it even took its first breath. Fact 4. Baptism before the baby breathed. If the mother's agony ended in delivery, the danger was far from over. In the Middle Ages, babies were born into a world where survival was fragile, fleeting, and never guaranteed. In some towns, nearly half of infants didn't live past their first year. Because death came so quickly, baptism wasn't delayed. It was treated as urgent, a spiritual emergency. Midwives were not only healers, but also trained to act as priests in critical moments. Manuals instructed them to keep a small bowl of holy water close to the birthing bed, ready at any second. If a baby was weak or silent, the midwife could sprinkle water over its head immediately, whispering the sacred words. In desperate cases, some were told to baptize the child while it was still half inside the mother to save its soul, if it slipped away in the very moment of birth. To medieval families, an unbaptized infant wasn't just a tragedy, it was a soul lost to limbo. Parents mourned not only the child's body, but also the eternal fate of a spirit denied heaven. Baptism was more than a ritual. It was a race against time, against death itself. But what if the mother didn't survive? What if the child was trapped inside her body? That's when the most chilling practice of all came into play. Medieval surgeons had one last option, a brutal one. A cut made not to save the mother's life, but to try and save the child, and sometimes only to baptize it. Which brings us to our fifth and most haunting fact. Fact 5. The terrifying last resort, the C-section of the dead. When all else failed, when the screams of childbirth faded into silence, medieval medicine turned to its most chilling act, the cesarean section. But don't imagine the hospital scenes we know today. This was no miracle of science. In the Middle Ages, the procedure was almost never performed to save a mother, because by the time it was attempted, she was already gone. The cut was made into the body of the dead or dying woman, not to heal, but to extract. Sometimes it was a desperate bid to rescue a living child. More often, it was so the infant could be baptized before it too passed away. Church law even supported this grim practice. Better to cut into the mother's corpse than to risk a child's soul being lost forever. For families, this act was a double blow: grief for the woman who had died in labor, and fear for the fragile child who entered the world through a knife in prayer. It reminds us just how dangerous birth was, not a moment of joy alone, but a battlefield where life and death collided. And that's the haunting truth of childbirth in the medieval world. Women stepped into the birthing chamber knowing it might become their tomb. Midwives stood as both healers and priests, fighting not just for life, but for the soul. Remedies ranged from the strange to the grotesque, and when all else failed, the knife delivered salvation in the form of baptism. Today, it's hard to imagine birth as anything but a medical event surrounded by doctors, light, and technology. But for medieval families, it was a ritual soaked in fear, faith, and superstition. So the next time you hear the phrase, the miracle of life, remember, in the Middle Ages, that miracle was often won through pain, danger, and practices we can barely comprehend. Which of these 5 facts shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found yourself glued to this journey into the past, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and join me again for more fascinating history you won't find in school books.